All right, so the client practicum is the answer to bringing the field and the classroom closer together for our students. We have a class website where all of our projects live, and I see we have some alums here. Their projects live here, and they are great portfolio items for our students. They are great reference points for other people in the field because all the end results of our projects are open source. So on the class website, you can view Markdown and other kinds of technical reports. You can view applications that were designed as parts of the project. And I refer to this page actually somewhat frequently whenever topics that have been covered in the practicum arise in my own professional work. I often refer to these projects as good examples of projects that clients of mine might want to pursue. So all of our projects are built around what's called a use case. And for those of you in technology, that might be a familiar concept, but for people in public policy, maybe less so. And a public sector use case is kind of a unique thing. It's the specific set of circumstances that drive the development of a technology solution. Okay, so you have a problem, you have a decision, and the technology is the tool that is used as a means to an end. This is a wonderful example from a number of our students from 2023. So practicum goes back to the 2018 school year. Including this year, we have done 49 total projects in a wide variety of domains, as you'll see today. And those range from housing, human services, transportation, land use, environment, economic development. We've done some things with criminology and criminal justice as well, education. And I'm not going to ask you to read this slide. This is a sort of data communications foul, but the purpose here is to overwhelm you with the number of people who are outside this institution that have lent their time, their data, their expertise, their mentorship to our students over the years. And we have some repeat clients, including some this year. And I'm just incredibly grateful to all the people who lend their time to our students. A lot of these are busy people, but they really carve out some space on their calendar and in their brain to help you, which I appreciate deeply. For the students, what we get is an introduction to a professional setting. So all of you made project management plans, you wrote agendas for meetings with clients, you had to deal with realistic political and practical limitations. Oh, the data for these things that I'm interested in were not collected before a certain year when they got a new director at this department, or the city that we're working with doesn't have comparable data to the example city on which we're basing our project. What do we do? There are opportunities for networking, portfolio development. It's been very nice to see you make deep professional connections with people that you're going to join in the field when you graduate. We introduced applied machine learning and application design, also AI implementations. You'll hear about some of those things today. And we also try to advance a mastery of non-technical data communications. So we're doing very in the weeds, very detailed data projects, but in the end, you have to be able to communicate what you did to a non-technical person. Can you sit down with the mayor and give them the 90-second version of what this is and what it means? That's ultimately where the rubber meets the road with this work. For our clients, we're happy to be able to help them advance programming and policy goals. We have opportunities to experiment and prototype. A lot of the things that you'll see today are things that people came to us with over the last year or two that they wished they could do. They wish they had the human resources to do. They wish they had the technical know-how to do. They wish they had the time to do, but they just don't. And so our students are able to generate some prototyping and experimentation that our public sector and NGO friends are really in need of. So I think that brings something to their work as well. And some of them take the ball and run with it and make professional implementations of these projects. And also, we appreciate the opportunity, both myself and Matt Harris, to work with these professional clients who we often have interface with in our work outside this classroom. This is a quote from a colleague who formerly was with Guilford County, North Carolina, who we have a project with them again this year. And I didn't pay him to say this. He is a quality county manager for quality government, so he's got thoughts about quality. And he expressed these unprompted, I will say, and I'll choose to take his word for it. But because I believe in our students so much, I agree, which is that you're going to get the highest quality work and the highest quality team from any university project. And every year, we sort of have to take this challenge from Jason to try to back that up. For Penn, I like this class a lot because the way it promotes relationships between our institution and the field, between the classroom and practice. It keeps us active with groups that are out in the field that you might want to go work for when you graduate, and keeps us in communication with them, what they're doing, how things are changing in their work. And we also make these projects open source. So we're trying to provide a public benefit with what we're doing. So that's my preamble. And I know we have some groups of students who are anxious and nervous to tell you about what they've been working on all semester. So now is the time for that. And let me tell you what it is you're going to see from our groups and how we're going to proceed with our format. So we have 5 teams representing 5 different clients. This is the order in which they will present. I'll tell you very briefly about each of them. Our first group is with a client in South Africa. And the project is called Understanding the Geography of Healthcare Access in South Africa. Our second project is about understanding off-peak roadway safety, and our client is the City of Philadelphia Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Systems. Our third project is with New York City Economic Development Corporation. Their ferry system is operated from NYC EDC, and our client is a MUSA Practicum graduate. I showed some of her work earlier in this slideshow. And that project is about improving on-time performance of ferry vessels. After that, we'll take a short break for 15 minutes. And our last 2 groups, one from Guilford County, North Carolina, targeting adult services to non-emergency EMS super users. And our last group, re-engineering Philadelphia's vacant property indicators model. And that is a project with the City of Philadelphia Office of Philly Stat 360, which is a part of the Parker administration's core data science and decision-making team, and the Office of Information Technology. So each group will present for 15 minutes, and then we'll have about 7 to 10 minutes for questions. Because we have clients who are joining remotely, we will give them the first opportunity to give feedback. And subsequent to that, if you raise your hand, we'll come around, but we'll bring you a microphone so that people who are tuning in digitally can hear the question. Likewise, if you're presenting, make sure that people can hear you at the microphone, because that's how our friends who are joining remotely will be able to understand. Okay, so without further ado, our first group, Understanding the Geography of Healthcare Access in South Africa. Is this?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up so early. It's good to be here. Our project was Understanding the Geography of Healthcare Access in South Africa in partnership with the Distributed AI Research Institute. Real quick, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our team. I'm Joey Cahill. This is Alexandra Stauffer. This is Jillian Kalman, and this is Tess Vu. We'd like to extend special thanks to our clients, Raseja Safala and Nelang Morrissey at the Distributed AI Research Institute, for guiding us through this process. Their research in spatial apartheid in South Africa set the groundwork for this project. So this project was based in the context of South Africa passing the National Health Insurance Bill in 2024, which guarantees healthcare access to all South African citizens. A little background on South African history for the uninitiated. South Africa from 1948 to 1994 existed as an apartheid state. This meant that racial segregation was codified in its constitution and a strict racial hierarchy was established. Non-white South Africans were forcibly relocated to segregated communities called townships and prevented from holding political office or positions of power. Economic and political power was consolidated in the white minority, and this lasted until 1994. Although apartheid does not exist anymore on paper, this project explores one of the very real ways that it exists to this day. So the problem that DARE wanted us to explore was if there was a quantifiable disparity in pharmacy access in populations in South Africa. Our use case is a member of the South African public that wants to use a geo-enabled dashboard to understand if their area has access to pharmacies and the degree to which that access is uneven across their country. So our study focused on two provinces, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Gauteng is the smallest province in South Africa by area, but the highest population with about 13 million people. It has a density of about 1,200 people per square kilometer. And KwaZulu-Natal is several times the size of it, with a population of about 10 million people and a density of only 177 people per square kilometer. Gauteng is the urban center of South Africa. It holds major cities like Johannesburg and Pretoria, and is kind of the industrial and economic center of the country. KwaZulu-Natal is far more rural, with the majority of the population living in farms and homesteads on the periphery of the province, and small urban centers like Durban focused along the East Coast. So now I'll walk you through some of the data sources we utilized real quick. Pharmacy data. We aggregated data from private healthcare providers as well as public sources like hospital records and the South African Pharmacy Council. We used census data from the 2023 and 2011 South African censuses. For our road networks, we utilized the OSMNX library from OpenStreetMaps to build our walk and drive networks to use for our access analysis. Processing and housing, all this data was ingested into Snowflake, and we used that to query it and perform some analysis. So big thanks to Matt and the team from Snowflake for providing us with training credentials, and also big thanks to Michael for trusting me with an API key link to his credit card. So finding pharmacies was one of the more creative and challenging aspects of this project. We drew from a variety of sources via methods like PDF scraping, web scraping, and then we geocoded them with Google Places API. So the process was essentially, we got our source lists that were in PDFs, CSVs, all kinds of methods, and brought them all together, deduplicated them, cleaned them, checked to make sure what was what, and then compared them to the South African Pharmacy Council's list of registered pharmacies. Not all of the pharmacies were registered, so that was a key thing that we had to deal with. We then put the street addresses and pharmacy names into the Google Places API to receive coordinates for those pharmacies, and then overlaid them on our boundaries. We then uploaded them to Snowflake and queried them from there. So now I will hand it over to Tess, who's going to talk about how we built our walk and drive networks. Oh no, we're going to talk about population first.
So there was a pretty significant gap in the population data. So the 2011 SALs were really granular at the, so there was a 12-year gap in the population data. So around 2011 are the SAL census, the really granular, fine-tuned, but outdated ones. And then 2023 was published and it's more coarse with the ward census. So we used a step-down approach where we used the parent wards proportional data from the 2011 to estimate the SAL granular population for 2023. And then you can see with the step-down method, we did estimate that around that townships who bear the legacy of apartheid contribute to about 70% 6% of the overall growth in South Africa, and that's not including its peers who are also affected by apartheid, like the traditional residential and the informal residential settlement types. And then as for the racial distribution, you can see that almost 80% of the provinces between the two are majority Black African. And then for the OSM networks, we use the walking and driving networks from OpenStreetMap for both of the provinces to inform our K-nearest distances, as well as the two-step catchment area method that Jill will talk about later. And just a quick look at the K equals 1 nearest distances. So you can see that the single nearest distance for the pharmacies is a lot more accessible for Gauteng. It's around average 3 kilometers. And then for KZN, it's around, it clusters around, I believe, 10 kilometers, and then it tapers off significantly. And then I'll pass it over to Jill.
So to measure pharmacy access and put a number to it, we use the enhanced two-step floating catchment area method. It's a spatial gravity model that's commonly used in measuring healthcare accessibility, originally developed for measuring primary access, but has been expanded to other fields. And what's happening here is that it's basically measuring the interaction between supply and demand. Supply is our pharmacies, and then demand is our populations. So at the pharmacy level on the left, we're asking, to what degree can this pharmacy serve the medicine needs of the people around it? And then when we switch over to the demand side, we look at the Sal centroids and extend designated catchment areas through the OSM road networks. And then we capture the supply that each Sal has from its surrounding pharmacies. And this part of the equation is asking, to what degree does the built environment of this area facilitate or hinder access to pharmacies? And so this accessibility index is essentially made up of these variable features. So we're using our pharmacy points, the road networks, and our census information all layered on top of each other to produce this output. And this is the order of how we're going to share our results. So these are the histogram outputs for our scores. We have two for each province. One is walking and one is driving. And as you can see, they all follow the same pattern of right skew with centering near 0. This is suggesting a spatial or population imbalance of some sort, which we will see in this map. This is a combination of the walking and driving scores laid over the SAL boundaries. So all of that gray area are dual low access. So these are areas that have very minimal walking or driving access. And you may be thinking, well, maybe these are rural, scarcely populated areas, but there's actually over 5 million people living in these areas with virtually no access to pharmacies. And we're going to be looking at the imbalances, so let's get into it. So we look at the access score distribution. We're starting with the DARE curated census variables, which classify the neighborhood types that are specific to apartheid. So you see the suburbs are representing over 70% of all access within our provinces. Yet their population is only 7.6 million, which is kind of almost the same as the population in our pharmacy deserts. And then we switch over to looking at our scores by race. And when we aggregate at majority race level of the SALs, the imbalance decreases slightly, but not really, because Black Africans make up over 80% of our population. So we see here that their access is roughly 33%.
And then this map kind of highlights the disparity between the suburbs and then the apartheid legacy areas. So on top, you actually see like the more dense areas, which is actually the area on the right. And then on the bottom is the suburb. It's right at the intersection, that Google Street View, but it's in the municipality of Itaquini. So the traditional residential areas in this area are like 81% Black, and they have significantly less pharmacy access and a lot more competition because of the population density. And then as for the present day implications, so apartheid's legacy, a lot of the lax of pharmacies aligned with the former Group Areas Act designation that created homelands and townships that segregated a lot of the Black Africans. And then the non-wealthy settlement types tend to have the lowest access scores, and a lot of the unregulated medicine trade has popped up because of this lack of access to cover the gaps. And Alex will go over the website.
I'm going to pull it up really quickly. It's just a brief video and I'll talk over it. But yeah, our main user again is someone who ideally lives in South Africa and within our study area provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. So this will be hosted on GitHub pages, and the first section gives us summary stats. So public pharmacy coverage, number of areas that are lacking, and the number of pharmacies that we found. And then there'll be a spatial contextualization, so the country, the provinces, and more details about what type of neighborhoods are in these provinces, what is the population distribution, and same thing for KZN. Then there'll be a discussion, like a text discussion about apartheid, the history, and then more in-depth look on a specific township, Livenhout and Komashu. Livenhout is in Gauteng and KZN. Similar metrics, looking at pharmacies, but also what are the access scores for these townships. We can't compare across, but we can look at the surrounding neighborhood types. And then pulling back out to the rest of the provinces. And this is the interactive map section. Here are all of the walk scores, the drive scores, and different metrics like population density map, pharmacies, economic statuses, and the neighborhood types. To close out.
So to conclude the presentation, so obviously like our research provides further investigation for identification of illicit pharmaceutical trade that tend to be more prolific in townships and other pharmacy deserts. And the methodology is replicable for DARE, so they can adjust to all the other provinces. But there's no unified pharmacy database, and there's a network bias toward the urban areas, and then outdated demographic data as well. So that's going to be our presentation.
Hello. Oh, this works. For our clients or anybody who's joining, especially from South Africa, we'll give you the floor to ask any questions you might have. We can hear you if you unmute yourself. Do we have anyone on the client side on the call? Okay, well, it doesn't seem like anybody immediately has a question. I'll ask the first question to get it started. Can you explain a little bit what is going on with the census data, why you had to model it and why you chose to do that? Like, what is the quality of the data and how is that? I notice you're sort of mentioning a number of different sources of demographic data in different years. What's going on behind that?
So from DARE, we were given the 2011 official census data at SAL level, which is extremely extremely granular and also had racial counts and age counts as well. So it was very detailed, but it was really outdated. And part of the validity of the access score is the demand side. So we needed to make sure that population was accurate so we can assess access accurately. So all we had was the most updated census information for South Africa we had was 2023 ward level, which is a lot bigger and it's way less detailed and just doesn't give us the flexibility to measure access scores. So yeah, we had to basically take the growth rates of the wards and then disperse them throughout the encompassing like SAL boundaries based off of spatial weights calculated from density and physical area size of those cells.
Questions? Yes.
A very nice presentation. I'm John Landis. I used to teacher. Very clear, very well focused. I like the fact that at the end you got to the bottom line, which means you had some big numbers that were, you didn't get lost in the weeds of here's this census tract, here's that census tract. You really had some good, big results. So I want to pursue that a little bit. First of all, did the census data enable you to look at either auto availability or auto ownership or income? Because one of the legacies of apartheid is not only is extreme black-white segregation, but extreme income inequality and extreme lack of auto inequities in motorized vehicle access. So I wondered if you were able to look at that and it might have any other insights. And the second is, what's the policy conclusion here? That we need more government-provided pharmacy distribution centers, or is it possible, as in the United States, that sort of the internet and remote delivery might sort of solve this problem? And you can imagine if you have extreme income inequality, you probably have extreme internet inequality in South Africa. So maybe sort of a Western style, Amazon pulls up with all the drugs you need isn't going to work there. And also, of course, the problem with remote access has always been unauthorized users. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that and how it plays out in South Africa.
So we did get to actually look at the wealth distribution data. Sorry, I didn't mention it, but the income distribution is that a lot of the lower access and the like the lower scores for pharmacy access actually was generally low for non-wealthy areas. So they generally uniformly had the lowest scores. And then for the policy kind of related thing, the NHI is just trying to help the public kind of include private pharmacies as well, because beforehand before the National Health Insurance Act, a lot of the insurance would kind of consolidate between private versus public, but they're trying to bring it together so that populations have access to both. Even though private pharmacies make up, I think, 80% of the market, public is 20%, and then the demand is pretty much inverse of that. And as for actually trying to make some action from it, that's where the accessibility index comes in to determine the population density and the competition of the pharmacies, as well as the K nearest distances to see, what's the nearest pharmacy? Do we need more? K3 gives them, are there options? So if the first pharmacy fails, do they have meaningful options around them? So.
Elizabeth.
Very nice job, everybody. I think was thinking similarly along the lines of what John had, which is maybe you don't need pharmacy access necessarily close to your home, right? Do you have any sense of whether or not people work close to their home or they're doing their daily activities close to their home? For example, my pharmacy is here because my doctors are close by to my work, not so much to my home, right? So where are people traveling to, and might that be making up for this inequity?
That is a great question. We don't have any specific data on people like moving between work and home. Most of the pharmacies were concentrated in the urban areas, so I think the highest levels of no access or extremely low access were mostly in the rural areas. And these are places where people are farming and things like that, so very agrarian. Those people are likely not traveling a lot. I don't want to make assumptions, but most of the pharmacy deserts were in rural areas. The urban areas generally have pretty good access to the pharmacies and pretty robust road networks. So I think from a policy perspective, the main thing is just understanding which rural communities don't have access to those and potentially prioritizing them for pharmacy infrastructure.
Sorry, I want to add on to that. When we did talk with Dare, it seemed like that there wasn't a heavy preference between walking and driving. It was pretty kind of equally distributed, where people kind of, not only some people may own their cars, but a lot of people travel by minibus taxis. I know according to the South African census data, from what I remember, at least in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, a lot more people, I think, walk to education. And then as for work, a lot more people take private vehicles. But that was from their South African census article from maybe 2021, from what I remember.
I have a question for you. Sorry, because there are like these there's like a frontier of this project that we didn't cross that I was hoping you could talk about because I think it's very interesting, which is the unlicensed pharmacies and how that's sort of a data and a policy challenge that we decided we were not or could not necessarily conquer in this project. I was wondering if you could talk about that because I think it relates to these access disparity questions.
Yeah, definitely. Something that Dare brought to our attention and wanted us to try to look at if we could was there's a significant amount of unlicensed pharmacies within South Africa, mainly serving those areas that had the low pharmacy density, so the pharmacy deserts and things like that. As far as finding them, that was a pretty difficult thing. A big thing we ran into was not able to get like a hard list of every single registered pharmacy. We have most of them, but the South African Pharmacy Council kind of didn't answer my emails requesting that. So a thing to do would be to compare a list of all known medicine shops, supplement places, things like that. Those are places where people get medicine informally, and it's a big problem because it's unregulated. There's a lot of counterfeit medication and things like that. So it's a safety issue, but also people are still getting medicine from these places, especially in the areas where there's no formal pharmacies. So kind of a necessary thing for the time being, but also something that needs to be addressed by the South African government.
Thank you so much. I was wondering about if you knew anything about the ownership of these pharmacies, because going back to the policy questions, one might think one of the things you could try to do to improve the access is to have more of a local economy where people can build their own pharmacies, right? I'm wondering if the ownership is also kind of racially segregated, or if the people living in these local areas have any means to start new businesses for something the need that is clearly there.
Yeah, so the majority of the pharmacies were those private institutions. As far as ownership, a lot of them have like corporate parents, things like that. Some of them are privately owned, like individual pharmacies, but the vast majority were your chains. So I think CVS operates there. There's a chain called Clicks Pharmacy. So a lot of large business operating the majority of the pharmacies. There were some private ones, but I don't, as far as like local community, like independent private pharmacies. I'm not sure what the exact legislation is within the government to kind of have that process, but I know that there is a pretty rigorous process for a pharmacy to become registered with the government. So I'm not sure I would assume that there's a lot of disparity there in who has the means to open a business like that. But it's a really good question, something to look into.
I also, wanted to add that all of our public pharmacies are basically the pharmacies inside of the hospitals, the public hospitals that serve the population. So it's not like a standalone brick and mortar public pharmacy like that we kind of have here. It's more you have to go into the hospital or your clinic or your medical center and access your medicine via the hospital pharmacy, which we all know is like an even higher burden because they're already overworked and like understaffed, obviously here, and then also in like South Africa too. They have a lot of problems with staffing their public institutions.
Yeah, I really enjoy the presentation. Just out of curiosity, do your workability index or driving index has a direct interpretation or just for like ranking purposes?
You're asking about the network distances?
Yes, basically
okay.
you show a histogram that have an index that shows.
Yeah, we didn't put that on there, but we did a k-nearest distances, make it more explainable and more straightforward in conjunction with the 2SFCA score. It's just to measure like, oh, if this person has, or if this area has less access or is designated as low access because of the high population demand, then you could compare that with the k-nearest distances like, oh, is it this far away? They're just kind of complementary to each other. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you, everyone.
Before our next team comes up, just a moment, sorry. I want to thank a couple people with this project specifically. Junbei Po, who's here, did a lot of work to help facilitate setting this project up and helped with our students a lot. So thank you very much to Junbei, not just for this, but also the application design elements. Our students go to you with their problems. So we really appreciate your help. And also, as I mentioned, Matt is not here. Snowflake giveth and Snowflake taketh away. So Snowflake took Matt away from us today, but it was very exciting to do an educational partnership with Snowflake this semester. They very graciously gave us accounts and a lot of tokens that our students could use, and Matt was able to give essentially the kind of tutorials that he would give to corporate clients. And that was especially exciting this year because, as we all know, the public sector is a little bit behind the private sector on certain technological adoption. I see some smirks in the audience there. But this is what's happening in the private sector in terms of the technology suites that people are expecting. And it will be very soon in the public sector, Snowflake, similar suites of agentic coding environments and data sandboxes and things like that. So it was very exciting to get to test out this partnership this year. And thanks to those who made it happen. Okay, sorry, I gave you a little bit of a pump fake there. Our next group, team from Otis.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and we are really honored. Sorry, what? Oh, I see. Okay. Good morning again, everyone, and it's our honor to present here for our final project, Understanding Off-Peak Roadway Safety. And before we get started, let me introduce our team members, Kavana, Demi, and Chuhan, and me, Christine. And we want to sincerely thank our client, Otis in the city of Philadelphia. And to be more specific, we want to thank Adam Smith, Carrie Bell, and Jacob Elliott. Thanks a lot for their invaluable guidance and material they offered. And we are really proud, and it's really our honor to support Otis and their Vision Zero mission to eliminate the traffic fatalities across our city. And to understand the absolute urgency of this research, let's see we only need to look at the Market Street just a few blocks from here. And last November, within a single week, 2 pedestrians were tragically hit and killed by the overspeeding cars, and all of them happened during the off-peak hours. And so this reveals a deadly blind spot. The traditional safety analysis focuses on the rush hour and ignoring that the wide roads become a high-speed racetracks when it's empty. And so our challenge is really clear. How can we use the spatial data to proactively predict these high-risk off-peak corridors before more tragedies occur? And our entire predicted model is driven by a 4-step hypothesis. First, the peak-oriented roadway design just built wide for the volume of the traffic. And second, during off-peak hours, this creates a massive access capacity. And this wide empty road just become a racetrack and psychologically increase the operating speed for the drivers. And in that case, the higher speeds increase injury severity when a crash happens. So to make it simple, a road designed to prevent the congestion will become a deadly racetrack when it's empty. And our literature review established 4 key relationships. And first, the fatal crash risk increased non-linearly with the impact speed, just as shown in this curve. And the second, the roadway design influences the operating speed. Wider lanes and higher design speeds are associated with faster travel speed. And third, low congestion conditions increase the free flow speed potential and variability. And finally, the roadway geometry shapes the driver perception and speed choice. So overall, these findings support the structural logic of our hypothesis.
In Philadelphia alone, 2,388 people were killed or seriously injured in traffic crashes in 2025. The majority of those crashes occurred on roads designed for peak hour throughput and operating in low congestion conditions for most of the day. The challenge for a planning agency is translating that systemic understanding into actionable decisions. Which segments carry the highest risk? What is the mechanism driving that risk? And critically, what physical interventions would reduce it and by how much? The use case we designed for is a decision support tool that identifies street segments where road design contributes to elevated off-peak speeding and forecasts how specific road geometry changes would shift that risk. The outcome we model is the frequency of speeding, defined as the share of vehicles exceeding the posted speed limit at the segment level by time of day. We're working with PennDOT crash records from 2020 to 2024. Note that 73% of records contain time of day data, so these patterns reflect 3/4 of all crashes. The left chart shows crash volume by hour of day. The yellow and orange shading mark the AM and peak windows. The PM peak is the highest bar as expected, but look at the overnight hours, midnight through 5 AM. Crash counts are still running between 1,000 and 1,500 crashes per hour. That is disproportionately high for a period when crash volumes are a fraction of peak. The right chart shows KSI rate by hour, meaning the share of crashes that result in death or serious injury. The dashed line is the citywide average of 5.9%. During peak hours, the KSI rate falls below that line. Congestion keeps speeds down and lower speeds produce less severe outcomes. Overnight, the KSI rate rises well above average, reaching 7.5 to 8% at some hours. That is roughly 35% above the citywide mean. Together, off-peak hours produce a disproportionate number of crashes relative to traffic volume, and those crashes are significantly more likely to be fatal. That is the core empirical finding motivating this project. These charts draw on DVRPC's speed measurement data and show the share of vehicles exceeding the posted speed limit at each hour of the day, disaggregated by road classification. The shaded regions in gray indicate the off-peak hours. Two findings are immediately visible. First, across all road types, the off-peak shaded hours show higher speeding rates than the peak hours. The relationship between congestion and speeding is consistent. When traffic volumes fall, speeding rises. Second, there's a clear hierarchy by road type. Major and minor arterials in the top two panels show off-peak speeding rates in the range of 40 to 50%. Collectors and local streets in the bottom panels show rates closer to 20 to 25%. This concentration matters for prioritization. The off-peak speeding problem is not uniformly distributed across the road network. It is concentrated on arterials, which are precisely the roads designed for high throughput and which carry the most pedestrian exposure. Building a predictive model requires integrating data from multiple sources because no single dataset contains the information needed to explain variation in speeding behavior. The map shows the 446 DVRPC speed measurement locations used in our analysis, color-coded by road classification. These points represent the segments for which we have observed hourly speed data, and they form the unit of analysis for our model. A core challenge we encountered is that existing data is insufficient for road geometry analysis. PennDOT crash records, for example, are missing lane count information for 79% of records. Crash data tells us where and when crashes occurred. It does not tell us the physical characteristics of the road that may have contributed. This gap is one of the primary reasons a modeling approach is necessary rather than a purely descriptive one. Our predictor set falls into four categories. Spatiotemporal and traffic dynamics capture when and under what flow conditions observations were made, time period, month, day of week, and observed traffic volumes. Roadway geometry explores the physical design of the road, lane width, segment width, length, and classification. Built environment and right-of-way capture the street-level context that shapes driver perception. Controls and enforcement capture formal deterrence. The roadway geometry variables, which are central to the scenario analysis, required manual measurement. We will return to the implications of that shortly. To make the data concrete before moving to our model, here's a single segment from our data set. This is Belmont Avenue. The photograph shows a 4-lane road with wide lanes, no bike infrastructure, no on-street parking, and a long uninterrupted stretch between intersections. The physical characteristics measured for this segment are 50 feet of total curb-to-curb width, 42 of which is allocated to traffic lanes across 4 lanes. No bike infrastructure, no parking, nearly 2,000 feet between intersections, 0 adjacent parcels, meaning no driveways, no pedestrian generators, no activity that would introduce friction. Average observed traffic volume at night is 2,245 vehicles per hour compared to 2,800 during morning peak. The road is operating at roughly 80% of its peak volume overnight with none of the congestion that would naturally constrain speeds during peak hours. The observed off-peak speeding rate on this segment is 86%. It is an illustration of what peak-oriented road design produces in low congestion conditions.
Having collected all of that information for all of our 446 roadway segments, then we move from data to prediction. Modeling based on these data allows us to quantify how the factors that we just described alone and in combination influence drivers' decisions to speed or not. Further, it allows us to make predictions about roadway configurations that are alternative to the ones that we observe in the data, and to see how those changes could potentially impact speeding rates as well, affecting all of the safety consequences that follow downstream. Our tooling that we chose for our modeling task was to use the random forest model. This was well suited to our task because random forests can capture nonlinear relationships between variables very well. And it natively accounts for interactions between the features, for example, lane width, road type, and time of day. And we can interpret findings from these models through plots that show you how model predictions would change as you change one variable in the model. And again, the variable that we're targeting for prediction is the percentage of traffic that is speeding on any given street segment at any given time of day. So the data set, as we mentioned, consists of these row segments with speed and volume measurements. It covers the past few years. And with this data, we separate about a quarter of the data set purely for testing the final model performance, and we use the remaining 3/4 in order to train the model and to validate various hyperparameter settings and evaluate the model as we develop it. And we use the testing data through cross-validation procedures to get a sense of how different specifications of the model might impact accuracy. And when all is said and done, our model is fairly accurate. Our final model has about 4 percentage point average error between the observed speeding frequency and the predicted speeding frequency. And that's based on the held out data that we did not test on. So what does the model tell us? First, it reconfirms the earlier finding that our roads are especially dangerous at night. The chart shows the predicted model speeding frequency separated out by time of day, off-peak at night, peak in the morning, off-peak during the midday, and peak in the evening. And you see that off-peak at night stands out, where speeding frequency is predicted to be about 5% higher than the rest of the day, controlling for every other factor that we just discussed that goes into our model. The model also finds that the width of the roadway that is dedicated to cars has a major impact on speeding frequency. So, for example, as the amount of roadway that is dedicated to traffic increases from about 10 feet to about 30 feet, the percentage of speeding goes up from about 20% to about 30%. So that's an increase by about half. From the model results, we also see that shorter road segments, having sidewalks on both sides of the road, having on-street parking on both sides of the road, and having separated bike lanes present on the roadway also decreases or is associated with a lower speeding. So having built the model, now we can apply it. For each of our street segments, we know the overall geometry of the road, which allows us to construct what-if scenarios for alternative road configurations involving that same patch of ground. For example, we can add bike infrastructure. We can perform lane diets. We can add or decrease parking, and we can introduce traffic calming. So if these roadway segments had different configurations, what can the model tell us about how speeding would be impacted? So these results and the model predictions are baked into our application, which then we'll talk about.
Now I want to walk through the final app we built. The goal of building out the app is to turn our model results to a tool that planners can actually use. On the landing page, we offer an overview of the app. The overview telling the users with this app, they can see where off-peak speeding risk is higher and test how that risk may change under different road design scenarios. The main part of the app is an interactive map. On the top of the map, there are 4 time periods offered the users to choose, which are morning peak, midday off-peak, evening peak, and night off-peak. It refers to our research questions, which is about time. By default, map colors segments by predicting speeding percentage. The redder the segments means higher share of vehicles are expected to go over speed limit. Also, the user can change how the map shows, means they can choose the road to color by road class, speed limits, and the number of lanes. After click on a specific road segment, a tooltip will pop up. The tooltip shows the segment ID, the current road design, the observed and predicted speeding values, crash-related information. And on the right side, there's an intervention panel. It is the main what-if part of the app. First, it shows the best reconstruction method to help the users to make a quick impression of this segment. Then the users can change some variables to see what will happen in some specific scenarios of these segments of the speeding. The scenarios include lane diet, major road diet, bike lane additions or upgrades, parking changes, traffic calming, and some combined interventions. After choosing an intervention type and a specific scenario, the app compares 2 prediction values. One, predicted speeding under the current design. The other one is predicted speeding under the selected scenario. Although the result is not a guarantee of a real-world impact, it is a useful tool to identify segments that may deserve further engineering review. The data table is another way to explore the results. The users don't have to start from the map. They can sort and filter segments by the different fields. They can also export data set if needed. The About page explains the method behind the app. It includes data sources, model performances, intervention logic, and key limitations. We hope the app can screen locations, compare scenarios, communicate possible interventions. But before any final decisions, all the results should be combined with field validation and professional review. In the end, the app is a bridge to connect predictive modeling with strict safety planning.
To close us out, we have one more slide. Wonderful. So here are our key takeaways. First, Philadelphia's off-peak roads are a design problem, not just a behavior problem. Arterials are disproportionately dangerous at night. Road space allocation can reduce speeding. And planners can now identify risk and model interventions before construction begins using our app. Thank you very much. Before I actually close this out, here's a QR code that you can use to access our app on your phone or on your device.
Thank you. I see that Adam and Corey are on our Zoom call. I'll give you the floor first if you'd like to ask some questions or make some comments. Adam, Corey, can you hear me?
I'm here. I'm here, Michael. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. This was very impressive. I'm curious about some of the challenges in maybe updating the data or thinking about the veracity of the data. The app is beautiful. It looks wonderful and very user-friendly, but there are always questions about I think the trustworthiness of data and I know we're always dealing with historical data and that's challenging when applying that um, to present conditions, but could you speak a little bit about that?
So I think maybe what you're pointing to was maybe the largest challenge that we faced. When you think about roadway geometry, you kind of assume that that's information that's already out there, but it's only in a fairly fragmented state that it is. So we first started out with gathering data from OpenStreetMap, but we quickly find out that there were definitional issues, and sometimes data quality and coverage wasn't as good as we would hope to be. So we ended up actually manually verifying all of the geometry measurements on Google Earth. So that is why our model is focusing on those 440 segments that are in the speed data. I think one potential avenue for that will be very helpful is to collect further information on roadways that we weren't able to measure. And one thing I do want to point out is that once the infrastructure is in place, then it's easy to feed it more data or even to retrain the same model using new data. So I think there's potential for this kind of tool to be used for going forward as well.
I wanted to add that if you want model generalizability, you need to go out and collect volume data. We predicted on these 446 segments because we had volume data only for these segments. But if you want to predict on a different segment, you need to go and collect volume data and also roadway geometry data. And once that's collected, it's fairly easy to apply to any segment.
Adam and Corey, do you have some other questions or comments before we canvass our room?
I think that's it. And I think Jacob may be in person too. I don't know if he has any questions.
He is.
Okay.
I didn't even realize that was him. Jacob, I'll turn the mic over to you. This is the beauty of working with our partners at the cities. They can be here for real.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for a wonderful tool for working with us this semester. We're really happy to have this as something at our disposal. I think one of the other questions that we were interested in, I know we threw a lot of data at you. We threw a ton to be, trained into a model. Wondering about other off-peak contributing factors that you may have seen to the crash severity. I know most of our study was based on the operating speeds because that is, one of the major indicators of the severity. But wondering if there was anything that you were able to dig into while you were parsing out the data in relation to, intoxication, off-peak lighting, the presence of lighting or not, things like that you'd be interested in sharing, or if you didn't get to it, if that's just a potential future next step for us, the city, to take on.
Yeah, I don't think we got into it.
Got it.
I can speak a little bit more about off-peak and speed. Lighting is, I think, something that's really important to consider. And so it's reflected in our model because we include the month that the measurement was collected, which will influence how much lighting is available at particular times. I think it's one really important kind of avenue for improvement in this project is we had fairly sparse information that would kind of vary throughout the day. So a lot of the geometry of the road won't change, at least for these roads from daytime to nighttime. But volume will change, and we included that, and kind of lighting condition through the month of measurement, we included that. But things like parking occupancy or pedestrian traffic volume, pedestrian volume, we weren't able to include. But I think those would be, that will probably influence differential speeding for the day.
Wonderful. And then one quick follow-up. You acknowledge the data limitations, especially within the geometry of the roadway, how a lot of that was manual work. If and ideally when the city is able to collect that data, how easy do you think it would be to train a model to be predictive for the entire city based off these control corridors?
Yeah. Of course, our model and our script and code will be available publicly and especially to you. So I think it would be pretty easy to do. Only thing from a 24-hour framework perspective I would add is you would ideally want it to be as much information that varies throughout the day. And I don't know how often it would be that you have volume measurements but not speed measurements. But if such a thing did exist, then it could definitely help predict speed even when that's not actually in the data.
Thank you guys again.
I would add that we have a presentation this afternoon in our individual client practicum that's about computer vision analysis of roadway network characteristics, and that would sort of bring Philadelphia. We've worked with complementary data sets in Houston and DC in the last few years. It would sort of, make an bring it up to the equivalent standard. Questions? John.
It's a very interesting presentation. Do any of you drive? Do you have a car? Because I noticed in your conclusions you said, design and engineering solutions have a place in addition to behavioral solutions. If you actually driven in Philadelphia, you know that behavior is the problem. I mean, in driving school here, I'm pretty convinced they teach you how to creatively go through yellow lights, or actually to creatively go through red lights without being caught. I live in Chestnut Hill, and it seems to me that the speed control strategy in Chestnut Hill this is going to be an editorial, is to put a rubber speed bump, which breaks down in about a week, right next to an unfilled pothole. Okay, so you destroy your suspension going up and you destroy your suspension going down. And what's significant is there isn't a pedestrian in sight where this happens. So there's a lot of work to do in this area around the design side. There's a lot of work to do in the behavior side, but I want to focus for a second on the modeling side, because I want to make a comment that I think you made some choices early on that, knowing what you know now, you might consider revisiting, okay? And doesn't mean those choices are wrong. It's just that when you're modeling, you have to make choices, and typically those choices are driven by the types of data that you have, okay, rather than the data you wish you have. But there's important choices nonetheless, and I want to focus on two or three just very briefly. The first was your choice of modeling percent of the traffic that's over the speed limit, period, not by 10 miles an hour or 1 mile an hour. And it's useful to know which is the problem. Is it 1 mile an hour over the speed limit? Is there 10 miles an hour over the speed limit? Particularly because you started your presentation by talking about the relationship between fatalities and speeding. So the question of how much speeding is too much speeding with regard to fatalities is really, really important. Along those lines, it would have been useful to me to see you circle around, okay, at the end, given the way you started, and say, and these are the areas of the city in which we can see a clear correspondence between speeding and crashes. And that to me, that was the missing piece of your analysis. You had a very nice sort of link analysis of where speeding occurred, but I'd really like to see if those were the neighborhoods or places or areas where there were typically a lot of crashes, particularly with pedestrians. So I think sort of how you conceptualize it is extremely important, and I would have taken my target variable, or what I call a dependent variable, having to do something more with outcomes, not just speeding. You know, where did speeding result in bad outcomes? I recognize that the data doesn't support necessarily make that easy, but that is a trade-off that every modeler has to make. Sometimes the data says do it this way when the model results in something that isn't always the most pertinent to the decision maker, and it would have been better to go with a less precise model. I want to just vary two things. Random forest is a great tool for prediction, but it's not a good tool for explanation, at least not without some further descriptives. So you didn't you had some analysis, but you didn't tell. You had some wonderful list of all the independent variables, but at the end, I didn't know which ones were the most important and the least important. Random forest makes that difficult. So I think it's sort of incumbent upon you as modelers to dig a little deeper in the method beyond random forest to say, okay, these are the things that really matter. Along those same lines, you said that your model performed well because it had a 4%. I forget, was it over prediction or root mean square? I don't remember what the. When doing these sorts of models, and again, this comes with experience, that 4% may be the ball game. Okay, it may be that 4% that your model didn't do well at is the 4% where the people die in traffic accidents and things like that. So I think it's really, really important when you're testing these models to look at the things the model doesn't explain, and no model is great, no model explains everything, and say, okay, this model didn't do well in these circumstances. Do we care about these circumstances? And again, this sort of experience comes with, I've done lots of really, really bad models that looked great on paper, but ended up not being as powerful as I would have hoped. So think about that going forward. You know, we often let our data availability determine the modeling path when we might be a little better off, you know, not fudging, but just working with the data a little bit in order to have a more policy pertinent model. So I think your presentation raised a lot of good points.
Oh, thank you. There's a lot of rich material to respond to, but I think I will begin with our choice of dependent measure. So of course, crashes it's what directly causes the fatalities, right? For the purposes of this project, crashes are of course much more sparse, so it's more difficult to measure accurately. But I think we should also not underestimate the importance of near misses, because those are often kind of ripe for intervention that we can prevent these near misses from turning into actual crashes. So I think that connection between speeding and crashes is very well taken. But I think, you know, if you look at biomedical studies about salt intake and high blood pressure, I think sometimes it's fine to say salt intake causes high blood pressure and leave to different work to go from high blood pressure to strokes, right? One more thing, and we also struggled with, you know, we thought about the exact measure of speeding kind of as a binary, and you're of course that higher speeding is more deadly. But if you recall back to the chart that we showed you about the relationship in the literature between speeding and fatalities, there's a very steep curve right in the middle. So whether somebody's going, you know, 35 or 40, it can actually make quite a bit of difference. So understood that, you know, going 21 in a 20-mile zone is very different going 40 in a 30-mile zone. It was also, but it was also easier to kind of interpret or to communicate the results saying speeding as opposed to, you know, going how many miles per hour over 25, for example. In terms of interpretability of the model, there's a lot that we could have included, but for reasons of time, we weren't able to. That'll be in our final markdown, including a variable importance plot. But we pulled out those factors that we thought were most relevant to the kind of use case at hand, which is roadway geometry and kinds of things that the city could do to change.
Okay, we have our group from New York City Ferry, right?
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I've been practicing this in the afternoon too much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sujin. I'm here with Simon, with Ming, and with Tyler, and we're here to present on a project we did for our client, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, specifically on the on-time performance of their ferry system. Before we go into the details of the presentation, I want to extend a thank you to Professor Michael Fichman and Matt Harris of the MUSA program, as well as Rebecca Adams, who was our client representative at the Economic Development Corporation, as well as the rest of her ferry team for all of the help they provided throughout this process. To begin, what is the New York City ferry system? So the ferry system was launched in 2017 with the goal to connect the underserved communities in New York City, as well as complement existing transit, such as the New York City bus and subway system, and also support growing neighborhoods. And you can really tell this through the way the system is laid out. There's a line that connects the Rockaways all the way up to a neighborhood in the Bronx. So those are very disparate, not disparate, but very far apart communities where a single seat ride wasn't possible before the introduction of the New York City ferry system. Since 2017, the system has reached a ridership milestone of over 50 million riders. They're utilizing 5 different routes. They have 38 custom-built vessels. And the system also went through a comprehensive system redesign in December of 2025 in response to performance metrics that the team was noticing. And this leads into our use case. So an operational manager at New York City Ferry wants to allocate resources optimally and forecast potential delay factors to prevent service delays. What does this mean? And it really breaks down into 2 pieces. First, we want to understand historical contributing factors to delays, and we also want to be able to predict delays 48 hours from now. And to further break those down, why do we need historical analysis of delays? Well, up till now, some basic data analysis and domain expertise has informed system operations. When I say domain expertise, there are examples of landings in the system that are too small. So only a single ferry or a few ferries can fit at a time, which causes traffic to have a huge impact. So they've adjusted routes to account for system-based constraints such as that. And also, the New York City ferry system is highly weather dependent. So ridership peaks in the summertime when a lot of people are going to leisure travel. And the operations team has again noticed that and adjusted the system accordingly. But a question remains of what more complex factors impact system performance. And that is where the historical analysis of delays comes into play. Next, why do we need 48-hour predictions? Well, the New York City ferry system is operated by a third party called Hornblower. They require a 48-hour notice to allocate staff to both landings and to ferry vessels. In addition, weather forecasts are more reliable 48 hours in advance. So that's where we landed on the 48-hour prediction focus. Our project focused on 4 different data sets encompassing all of 2024 up through June of 2025. First, we had ridership and trip data from the system, followed by Swiftly data, which is GPS tracking of the New York City ferry vessels, AIS data, which is international, but specifically our use case focused on marine traffic in New York City Harbor, as well as NOAA data. So we looked at weather data and water level and currents in the New York City Harbor. And with all of that, I will be passing it off to Ming, who will be talking about the operational insights, the historical analysis of delays.
Thanks, Sujin, for introducing the data sources and overview use case. I want to focus on the operational insights from the historical data. What can we learn from the past delay trips and how this pattern can support operational decisions? First, I would like to start with a delayed trip. That was a Soundwell southbound trip. On a summer weekend, we can see the route on the map, and the photos are taken by ourselves, and it helped ground the setting. This trip started close to the schedule, but delay accumulated stop by stop and ended almost 20 minutes late. So for this particular trip, we checked what is happening around it. There was route and schedule context, passenger load, environmental conditions, including temperature, water level, and wind speed, and nearby marine traffic. Since all this happened at the same time, we need a model to separate the signals. The example shows why we need a broader model. After looking at one trip alone, we would like to know, across all start level observations, what factors are associated with lateness. We model arrival lateness in minutes and group predictors into 5 domains. Then we use a stacked linear regression model so the results can be interpreted in minutes and connected back to operations. Okay, this shows where the model is getting most of its explanatory power. The full model explains 74% of lateness variation, but operation propagation alone explains almost 60%. So the main story is delay carryover. Delay often start earlier and move through the system. The other domains are smaller but still useful because they give operators things to monitor. Okay, the clearest finding is that delay carries forward. Every 1 minute of inherited delay is linked to about 0.8 more minutes of later lateness, and each additional stop is also linked to half a minute more lateness. The chart on right tells us the same thing. Most excessive delay is inherited or carried within the trip, shown in the orange and green sections, rather than newly created at current stop, shown in the gray section at the bottom. So the main pattern is accumulation. Okay, the second finding is that risk is not evenly distributed across routes and time. Rockaway is linked to more than 3 extra minutes of lateness compared with the reference route. And afternoon service is also linked to almost half a minute more lateness. The chart on right also shows average lateness by time being, with green Whitcomb highest around 3 to 5 p.m. So this gives operation a simple watch list. Some routes and time windows need closer attention. The third finding is that monitorable signals are also useful. Demand, environment, and time explains less than delay propagation, but they're easier for operators to check before or during service. So the model turned historical patterns into operational attention, which route and time windows and conditions may need extra support. Now I'll pass on to Simon to talk about what can we learn 48 hours ahead.
Thank you, Ming. So for the predictive part of the project, we start with a simple operational question. What can we know 48 hours before departure about excessive ferry delay risk? So this model is for early planning. Trip has not happened yet, so we can only use the information that was available in advance. The goal is to take those features and estimate the probability of excessive delay and turn that into something the operations team can act on before the service begins. And that 48-hour ahead setting changes the feature design quite a bit. In the associate model, we can use realized same-day information like actual ridership, realized dwell time, and previous landing delay. They can all explain the delay after the fact. But in this predictive setting, those variables are not available. So we want to remove those variables and focus on the decision time information, such as schedules, landing segment context, forecast-based conditions, and historical lag features. For example, instead of using the same-day boardings, we use 7-day lag boardings. And next is our prediction target. We chose a binary variable of whether trip experiences an excessive delay, and by which we define more than 10 minutes. We use this 10-minute threshold because operationally a delay beyond that point is much harder for later trips to recover from. And we chose this classification target instead of predicting raw delay minutes is because it connects more directly to operations. A probability of excessive delay can be easily translated into a warning or risk category that is easier to understand and use in the dashboard. So for model evaluation, we focus especially on precision and recall. For precision, it means among all the flagged trips, how many are truly delayed. And for recall, we mean among all the excessively delayed trips, how many do we successfully catch? Both matters if precision is too low, the dashboard creates too many false alarms, and if recall is too low, we miss too many risky trips. For this use case, we lean toward higher precision because we want the dashboard to be useful without overwhelming the operators. And how we chose the model. We first screened 5 model families and then narrowed down the comparison to 2 finalists, which is random forest and XGBoost for further hyperparameter tuning. And with a precision first threshold, random forest turned out to give a better operational balance, which make the precision comparable while preserving more recall. It could catch more truly risky trips without moving too far away from our conservative alerting goal. So we selected random forest as a model we carried forward with. And looking into the models, the top 5 features of importance fall into 2 broad groups. First one is environmental water conditions, including temperature, water level, and currents, which makes sense for ferry operations. And the second part is recurring operational patterns. These features help capture repeated demand and traffic patterns when we do not yet know the exact same-day information. And the final output is a model predicted probability of excessive delay for each upcoming trip. And that probability can be easily translated into low, medium, and high risk bands. For operations team, this means they can identify which trips need routine monitoring or deserve closer review. And next, Tyler will show how these risk scores are translated into the app experience.
Okay, so I'm going to be going over the application itself. Let me pull it up here. Oh. Okay, so the user will be presented with a map and an input pane on the left side there. Oh, let me make it full screen actually so you can see it. So there you have the routes and all the landings, and each landing shows you exactly what route it is served by. So on the left side here, it allows you to do a targeted analysis on certain routes. So you can select multiple here. You can pick like a story in East River, and then you can also make these selections on the map itself. In terms of date, it has an input field here, so you can enter any date you want. However, it has to be a valid date and one that is at least 2 days ahead. If you want to do just a quick analysis on the earliest day you can, there's a little button that populates 2 days ahead. And then for the temperature and precipitation, those are just inputable fields. So it goes like 60 and 15. I think that's what I put, actually, hopefully. Yeah, okay. So then you'll hit go. So you'll be presented with the categorization on an hourly basis on the risk of excessive delay, along with the probability below that. It also has a chart below that that shows the overall for the entire day and has a slider that'll update the information based on which hour you have selected. Below that, it has some hourly conditions. And so it has, like, for example, the current GTFS number of trips for that route for that hour, the max load factor, which load factor is a percent of, or the onboard passengers as a percent of the vehicle capacity, and as well as the general capacity that has been used for that route. So below that is kind of a route summary for the entire day. So you'll be presented with the daily risk for delay, the number of hours that had the highest risk, the peak load factor hour, the number of trips per hour for that for the route, and then the average load factor, the number of onboard overcapacity, and then you'll have a chart that shows the overall load factor for that day, as long as the hours where it was overcapacity. Also, just want to point out that some of these metrics aren't like, so all of these in the hourly and route summary fields, they're not predicted. They're using historical data from that same amount of time the previous year. And so you can also switch between the routes on the bottom there. And then if you want to go between north and southbound trips or patterns, you can. And then adjusting any of these inputs is just as easy as going back and making any changes there. Okay, so what have we learned through all this? As Ming mentioned earlier, inherited delay is one of the primary factors here. Delays do compound and propagate throughout the day. And that kind of, oh, there we go. That's the slide. And so, is this? This isn't the right one, but oh well, I'll just go over it. So some of the key takeaways that we want to talk about, again, the number of routes. So like more routes with more number of landings has a higher risk of being excessively delayed. And then also just want to point out some limitations to our data set. So there's a class imbalance. So the number of trips that were classified as excessively delayed was a smaller share of the total number of trips, which can make it hard for the model to predict those accurately. Also, the data we were provided with is from January 2024 to June 2025, and is also based on the previous iteration of routes. So extrapolating that to the current system makes it a little bit challenging. And then also just want to point out that there are some features that weren't represented here, such as like events or temporary no-wake or security zones. And those are just not input just because we don't have an explicit record of when those occurred. Okay, then again, we just want to make sure to thank Rebecca, Matt, and Michael for all their support through this and putting the scope together, and thank you.
Thanks very much. I will say that these are the most fun data that I think we've had on a project. Just, we made a lot of nautical jokes. You got to go on a field trip, which I sadly couldn't join you. I'm still bummed about. But this was a really fun project. I enjoyed being along on the ride with you for that. That is a pun. So our clients are on the line, and I'll turn the floor over to them for any comments or questions they might have.
Hey, can you hear us? Great. Hi, this is Rebecca calling in from New York with NYC Ferry. We're all in the room here. Really enjoyed your presentation. Thanks so much for putting that together. The app is really impressive and really nice to hear other people that have gotten really nerdy in our data, and that this was the most fun data we've had in a while. We all had a little chuckle at that. This has been really neat. I'm curious if you could talk a little more about where delays happen and like where you found in your exploration where delays are most likely to occur in the system.
We found where delay comes from our associative model. Actually have an appendix. Sorry. Oh, I think wrong direction. This chart shows, I think, top 10 or so predictors from our associative model. And you can see in the middle line interpretation of them. Actually, before we use the stacked model, we found that the inherited and carried within trip, they were so strong that other predictors became very, very small, such as temperature. The coefficient of temperature is just lower than 0.1. So we used this stacked modeling to separate them. But I think the most strong features are also the route and schedule context and operational factors.
This is James. Is there an opportunity, if you were to take this further, I mean, standard weather predictions go 10 days out, and for a couple of days are hourly. Would there be a way to translate this into something a little more automated that just says, given the weather predictions, what that usually does to ridership and what is coming up, that, you know, it's Tuesday today, could you give us an alert that says Thursday, you have high delay risk on this route at this time? Is that a potential outcome of this, or is that a few steps removed from where we could go?
Hi, I think because we're using like 7-day lag variables, so if we want to do an automated model, we have to like update the data sets bit by bit. So like if you are 7 days ahead, you have to update the current day behaviors and outputs and to predict the 7-day performance later. And we 7-day because it's like weekly is probably the most like significant patterns of like fire riderships. So we could change it to like 14 days so we can predict 14 days later.
That's helpful. I'll just say, and this is excellent work, and I'm sure consistent with the scope, thinking as an operator, the kind of things that we want to be able to see, right? Like are not having to investigate it, but like having it pop up to us to say, you know, given everything we know in the past and what's coming up in the future, like here's the thing. So just as you continue thinking about things for transportation, like that's the operational focus. Like what can you tell an operator in advance to keep an eye out for? But this is really great for the look back.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Matt. Just want to echo Rebecca. The app looks really great. I think we're all excited to play around with it ourselves. You had mentioned some of the limitations in your data. I'm curious if you could access some data to help improve your predictions, but just didn't exist. What would that data item be?
Due to the our findings, we think maybe like there's some events on Rockaway Beach, we suppose, and maybe the Coast Guard's restrictions, they often happen in like Wall Street and like right at the United Nations at 34th Street. And maybe these, and no wake zones, because there are some like restrictions on the factories nearby on the east coast of the East River. I think these factors are most important affecting the ferry operations.
I know as part of the data that we threw at you, we threw a lot of like other marine traffic information, and I see marine traffic isn't on your list here. So could you talk about that a little more? What did you find when working with marine traffic and how that impacted or didn't various delays?
We created a variable called like 7-day segment vessel counts that is using the like buffer of a specific route, and we track the same route, same segment, and at the same time period 7 days ago, and like they show up in the top 5 feature importance. So if the vessel counts are higher, then there's a higher probability of delay.
This is Matt again. You had mentioned that there's like an importance of the cascade effect. There's an initial delay, and then it just gets worse from there. But really, like that initial delay really causes a lot of the future delays. Do you have any hypotheses on what causes the initial delay?
I think we try to measure the residuals, which is the total delay minus the inherent delay minus the like en route propagation, and the model turned out to be like pretty similar with what we had with just predicting it by the temperature and other features is not as well. So we think like the delay all day are just mainly because of propagation. Like at the first place, it's just like some factors causing it to delay like 1 or 2 minutes, and stop by stop it aggregates.
Do you have a thought? Sorry, that was very loud. On the terminal end, I think this is an interesting question. On the initial terminal end where the delay gets inherited, the vessel is getting off to a certain late start. Is there anything informationally that allowed you to look backwards along that vessel's history, or anything that happened operationally before the vessel started to have any insight into that?
Probably we had the notes, like the operators report for each ferry trip. And like by discovering it, like we think, although most of the delay by minutes is inherited, but when we look at like if there's one stop that propagates the delay, aggregated add to the delay a lot, there's actually not. Like most of the delay are just added bit by bit, like for less than 5 minutes, like 3 minutes this stop, 3 minutes that stop. So I think we could look at the initial delay part for burn the nodes, but like most of them are just pretty random propagation throughout the water segments and the lands.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more question before we take our break. Rebecca, do you and your team have any additional questions?
I don't think we do. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and it's nice to hear from you, Rebecca. Do we have a question from the room? Okay, it seems like, oh, one. All right.
Well, I just want to say that was a terrific presentation. I really enjoyed it. For those of you who've never taken the ferry, if it's a sunny day and you're in New York, it's absolutely the best way to see the city, starting on Wall Street, going up to 96. It's one of the really great New York City experiences. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got to take it on a sunny day. It's fabulous. Three things I really appreciated about your project. First of all, I thought your framing was just incredibly useful from a practical perspective in two ways. First of all, that you focused on, you understood this was a probability, not a discrete thing. It was continuous probability. You focused on low, high, and medium probabilities, and I think that's a really instructional way to think about it. So nice job there. Also, I like the fact that you focused on the things that you could control versus not control, the 48 hours. That was a really insightful thing to do. Maybe your client had something to do it, but I'll give all the credit to you. And lastly, I thought the interface on your little demo just worked tremendously in the sense that it seemed to me as a potential user that your arrangement of the space was terrific, but also the types of reports that you provided seemed to me to be exactly the types of information that would be very useful to a user. So to me, top to bottom, this was a great effort.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well done. Okay, we have a brief break until the hour when we'll hear from our last two groups. So we'll reconvene at 11 o'clock for our Guilford group. All right, and we're right back on timeline. And our next group is representing one of our longest and most favoritist, most loved, I don't know, clients, Guilford County, North Carolina, which for those of you who don't know is where Greensboro is located, and Guilford is the county government there. And very nice to see some of our friends from Guilford on the call today. So I'll let this group take it away.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome to our final presentation. Thank you so much for coming and supporting us. We're Guilford County Group, and we'll be presenting today about our work with Guilford County Emergency Services Department team to address the need of emergency services of super users. So I want to start by introducing ourselves and our clients who have been very supportive throughout the semester. So we're a group of 3. Here is Layla, and this is Chloe, and Lauren, myself. So our clients are the Guilford County Emergency Services Department and the Office of Integrated Data and Services. We want to thank Elise Mahood, the Director of Integrated Data and Services, Shelby Flynn, Integrated Data and Service Program Manager, and Jeff Hutchins, Emergency Services Manager, for their assistance and expertise for the semester that they've given me also. And we also want to thank our instructor, Michael Fichman and Matt Harris, for teaching and guiding us. For the past several years, Guilford County Emergency Services has been working to reduce the number of non-emergency calls to 911. A small number of residents, known as super users, account for a disproportionate number of calls to EMS. So these residents generally have complex social and chronic medical needs that can't be fully addressed by emergency medical workers, and they are costing the EMS system, which says 85,000 calls come through their system every year. And since 2023, the Emergency Services Department has operated a small other resources team. It's called RTIM, where 4 caseworkers tasked with providing social services and wraparound supports to help super users who have been identified by first responders. So this program has already seen significant success, but it is limited by the capacity of EMTs and paramedics to notice individuals at risk and bring them to the attention of other resources team caseworkers. So meet Nancy. We want to start our presentation by telling Nancy's story. Nancy is a composite patient based on real patterns in Guilford County's EMS dispatch data. So Nancy has called EMS 136 times for the past 3 years, and 67 of those calls were for lift assists because she was too weak to stand up. Nancy's rarely calling EMS because she's experiencing an acute medical emergency, but she's an older adult with mobility limitations and social needs who doesn't have any other way to get help. So for super users, Nancy is one of nearly 1,300 Guilford County residents who have called EMS 10 or more times in a year, or 15 or more times over the past 3 years. But we want to make it clear that these callers are not abusing the system, but they are relying on EMS as a substitute for a social safety net, a role that emergency services workers cannot effectively play, and that does not adequately meet the needs of Nancy and others like her. So how does the system work now? Work for Nancy and others like her. When she calls 911, a dispatcher takes her location, records a dispatch reason, and sends a crew. The first responders help her up and record some basic demographic information and their impressions and leave. If the same paramedic sees Nancy enough times, they might flag her for the resources team, the small group of social workers who can connect patients like Nancy to home health aides, mobility equipment programs, and other services. But their referral depends entirely on busy first responders identifying patients at risk. In the meantime, Nancy has already called 67 times for lift assist. These calls represent months or years of her needs not being met and many of $1,000 lost. So here's the financial picture. Each EMS call costs Guilford County approximately $1,500. And super users account for a disproportionate share of total call volume, diverting resources from true emergencies. The other resources team exists to connect these patients to social services, but their caseload is constrained. So we with 2 workers serving 11 clients at a time and about a 3-month average case duration, they can support about 88 clients served per year. And for every client the team could have reached earlier, there were months or years of preventable EMS calls before referral. So this is where our tools fit in. Right now, EMS staff sometimes flag super users for follow-up manually. Our tools automatically flags anyone who crosses the threshold of 10 annual calls or 15 lifetime calls. And our model adds a third layer of it identifying patients who are on the trajectory towards super user status before they cross that threshold and ranks them by risk level so that other resources can prioritize who to reach out first. And Chloe will talk about our EDA results.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about who are the super users. So Guilford County provided us with an initial data set of all EMS dispatches between 2023 and 2025. The data set included nearly 220,000 dispatches associated with about 108,000 patients. The variables in the initial data set included use patterns, descriptions of patients' complaints and outlook, demographics, and geographic context. We aggregated this call level data to the patient level to determine how many callers were super users and see what patterns emerge among this group. Ultimately, we identified nearly 1,300 super users. So we started off by exploring what distinguishes super users from non-super users. One of the clearest differences is in chief complaints. You can see here that lift assist calls are heavily overrepresented among super users, as well as sickle cell, which is an often debilitatingly painful chronic illness. So patients repeatedly calling for help standing up, like Nancy, are often using EMS to fill in the gaps. As you can see here, just under 60% of super users are Black compared to under 40% of patients who are less frequent EMS users. This gap reflects racial disparities in healthcare access and socioeconomic status in Guilford County. Super users are also most likely to be male, though the gap isn't as stark as some of the other demographic comparisons. And super users also skew significantly older than other patients. This most likely reflects both higher medical need and greater social isolation among older adults, both factors that make individuals more likely to rely on EMS as a safety net. And super users are substantially more likely to be on public insurance. This is in part a reflection of age, since most older adults in the data set are on Medicare, but it's also another marker of the underlying social factors at play. Patients without robust private insurance coverage have few other avenues to turn to when something goes wrong. Super users are also disproportionately likely to be experiencing homelessness. About 2/3 of patients in our data set who are unhoused are also considered super users, although they are a very small minority of overall super users. So where do super users live? So finally, we wanted to understand the geographic context in which super users live, so we took a closer look at the 3 zip codes with the highest share of super users relative to the overall population. This is one of them, a section of downtown Greensboro where nearly 3 in 10 households are in poverty. This area is majority Black, which echoes the patient-level demographic data we were provided. Its overall population is also relatively young, though most super users in the area are more than 50 years old.
Okay, so now moving on to how our model works. So our modeling process was very much informed by the results of our exploration of the dispatch data, which revealed, as Chloe just talked about, significant racial disparities and socioeconomic vulnerabilities associated with super user status. And just to reiterate, our goal with this model was really to spot patients at risk of becoming super users sooner so that fewer of them fall through the cracks and so that the adult resource team can connect patients to social services and reduce repeat non-emergency calls. So our model uses a 3-part prediction window. So we built each patient's risk profile from their first year of their EMS history, then left a short buffer in the middle, and checked whether they became a super user in the final 2 years. And this fixed horizon really ensured that every patient got the same amount of time to accumulate history and solved a bias problem where patients who first appear late in the data set look artificially low risk simply because they hadn't had time to rack up calls yet. And then here's what our model looks for. So it looks at use patterns, so total prior calls, and also how often calls cluster within 30 days of one another. It looks at the clinical signals that we discussed in our exploratory data analysis. So history of lift assist calls, sickle cell mentions, other complaints that flag ongoing unmet social or medical needs. It looks at demographics, so age, gender, insurance status, housing status. It doesn't look at race on an individual level, but we did bring in zip codes and zip code level racial and other demographic data, poverty rate, housing cost burden to kind of fill in those gaps. And importantly, it also looks at interaction effects between those two things. So lift assist history and public insurance and age was a particularly significant one. And Nancy, who had 136 calls, who had a really significant clustering pattern and repeated lift assist complaints, would have appeared near the top of our model's risk list after just a handful of early calls. And then here's how our model performed and how we envision it being used by Guilford County EMS and adult resource team caseworkers. So to determine how well our model actually worked, we evaluated it on 3 metrics. The ROC-AUC measures how well the model ranks true future super users above everyone else across the whole patient population. Ours is 0.9, which is quite strong. PR-AUC measures ranking quality specifically among the positive cases, so that's the true future super users, which is obviously a much harder task because they represent such a small portion, about 1% of our total data set. Our model scores 0.15, which is weaker, but about in line with what we expected, and certainly meaningfully better than chance. And then at the top 200 threshold, which means if we gave the adult resource team a ranked list of the 200 highest risk patients, our model captures 34% of all true future super users. That's the number that obviously matters the most for actually running the ART program. And it represents a meaningful improvement over the status quo, where fewer at-risk patients are being identified, and only about 20% of those identified by individual first responders are determined to be good fits for the ART program. So digging into what drives these results a little bit more, the single strongest predictor is total prior EMS calls, as you might expect. Second most important is call clustering. So multiple calls within 30 days obviously indicate patients in really significant ongoing distress. Other features are also important to varying degrees. So that includes clinical flags like lift assist, neighborhood factors, and age, insurance status, and housing status. And interaction effects really help bring those features to the surface. So for example, patients who are above a certain age and have lift assist complaints and are on public insurance, we determined to be really disproportionately at risk. So how could this actually work in practice for the adult resource team? First, our model outputs a ranged risk score for every patient. ART caseworkers could work from the top of the list down, conducting a brief intake to screen out false positives and enroll true positives in the program as their capacity allows. And then our model is deliberately tuned to maximize recall, which means that it prioritizes not missing true future super users over like kind of at the cost of some false positives. But our final output is ranked in order of risk, and it includes specific risk factor flags like lift assist, unhoused, et cetera, that could really enable ART caseworkers to most efficiently screen out false positives and determine who is actually a good fit for assistance. And then practically, we see that the team could refresh the risk list weekly or monthly as new EMS visit data arrives and as their capacity allows. And then they could kind of always work from whoever sits at the top of the list. The final step of our modeling process was conducting a cost-benefit analysis. So to estimate what this program could save Guilford County, we looked at 3 comparable programs that enrolled high-frequency EMS users into a social services outreach program. Onslow County, North Carolina, nearby, served 213 patients in a similar program and saw about a 2/3 reduction in EMS calls, saving $1.2 million or about $5,600 per patient. San Diego, in a smaller version of a similar program, served 51 patients and achieved a more conservative 1/3 reduction in call volume. They saved about $300,000 or about $6,200 per patient. And then finally, Wasau, Wisconsin's intervention was the smallest. They served about 13 patients, but they also achieved a 2/3 reduction and saved around $100,000 or $7,700 per patient. So our savings estimates for Guilford County use the estimated local cost of $1,500 per EMS call, and they apply 3 scenarios to kind of bracket the range of plausible outcomes. The most conservative at a 1/3 reduction in calls, mid-range at 50%, and then optimistic at 2/3 reduction. in calls by super users. And here's what those scenarios look like in practice at current and also expanded staff capacity using the mid-range estimate of 50% call reductions. So at current staff capacity of 2 workers and 88 patients per year, the program generates an estimated $215,000 in gross savings against $75,000 in staffing costs for a net savings of $140,000 per year. Adding 1 worker brings that to $188,000 net savings. And our key finding here is really that every hire through 9 workers remains net positive. Each additional salary is more than offset by reduced EMS calls. So the current 2-worker adult resource team is really capturing only about 18% of the program's maximum net savings potential. Before we move on to the dashboard, I just wanted to close out this section by returning to our composite patient, Nancy. Nancy represents about $68,000 in annual EMS calls, 136 calls at $1,500 each, spread across 3 years. Connecting her to an ART caseworker costs approximately $3,400 per year. And even at a conservative 1/3 reduction in call volume, the intervention saves more than 6 times its costs. And the really key thing about our tool is that it gives Guilford County a way to identify the next Nancy before she's made 136 calls. In her case, probably after just a handful of early calls.
Now it's the dashboard. I'll bring it up really quick. So this dashboard is a prototype for Guilford County EMS super user outreach. So the first page you see when you land on the page on the app is the pop-up message that you see right here. This sets expectations before users enter the main dashboard pages. This pop-up clarifies that this is not live data and all client records or fake sample data. So if you go into the page, this is the first page. We have 4 tabs that you can click on the left. So the main dashboard page is for the daily staff use. Staff can search for and filter clients, and you click. It will give different cards of client summary, and they can click a client to review details, risk flags, and follow updates. And there is editable notes to leave notes for future reference. And here's the model wizards page. So this page explains how the predictive model we built performs. The key idea is connecting model wizards to staff capacity, how many clients the team can realistically review, and how many feature super users the model can capture. And the summary statistics page. This page gives context about the client population. It shows EDA patterns by race, gender, housing, and interests, plus summary indicators and prototype charts from the sample dashboard data, which can be replaced with real data in the future if needed. And the last tab is the cost savings page. So overall, and here is the cost benefit analysis page. This page translates the work into staffing and budget terms. So it shows assumptions, estimated net savings, and how savings can change as staffing increases with some case studies right here. And so overall, this dashboard turns the model we built into an operational tool. It helps staff prioritize outreach, understand client patterns, and discuss staffing needs with evidence. So that is it for the dashboard and our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our colleagues from Guilford, I'd like to give you the floor to ask any questions or make any comments you might have. So I see we have Alice and Jeff and Shelby. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate all the thoughtful work and effort that went into the work and the presentation both. I do have one question about the staffing model. Does the model at 9 staff workers take into account um, the predicted volume that Guilford County receives in high utilizers?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last word, the predicted volume.
Okay. The predicted volume that Guilford County receives in high utilizers. So, let's say the volume is 185,000 calls every 5 years. I don't know. I'm just making numbers up right now. And at some point in time, you have not enough calls to assign to staff members. So I'm wondering if that model takes into account that.
Yeah, it sets a cap at the number of super users that we identified in.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work you guys have done. I will tell you, it's nice to see something that works like this instead of me doing a lot of this stuff manually. So I really appreciate that part as well. One of the questions I had kind of back end of what Alice said is one of the things we're really working on is like a service rate prediction model, looking at increase of population. Was that included in part of the staffing part, or is that just talking about, excuse me, how many high utilizers we potentially may have? With the aging population, et cetera. Was that taken into account of that too?
It's a great question. It was not really taken into account.
Okay. No, that's fair. Okay, thank you. I appreciate all the work you guys did.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for all of your help with this.
Thank you.
I'll just echo what Alice and Jeff said. Y'all did an excellent job, and I love seeing the net savings calculations. I think that's really important from an administration level as we think about budgetary decisions, and we don't often necessarily have all the time to get in the weeds like that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank our colleagues from Guilford. I think we've been working together for 8 years, I think. Alice and I have been talking about this project for almost 2 years, and Jeff did an enormous amount of work on top of already busy schedule to get the data. So I'm very grateful to your continued partnership. From the room, do we have some questions? Yes. Would someone like to precede John? I have a question for you, actually. And maybe this is just by way of illumination, but I think it's very instructive maybe for some of your student colleagues. What were some of the ways that you had to think carefully about the sensitivity of these data, how you handled them, how you represented them, how you're able to communicate, things like that?
I would say a few things come to mind. The first is just in terms of narrative, we really wanted to be clear, like, even though the cost savings associated with this program are really important, we really didn't want the narrative to be, and this reflected what our partners in Guilford County told us. Like, we really didn't want it to be a narrative of people abusing the system, overusing the system. It's really just a kind of emergency services are like the last kind of fragment of social safety net available to some people, and it doesn't really adequately meet their needs. So we wanted to be really careful about that. We wanted to be really careful about patient privacy. So anytime we were showing like Nancy as a composite patient, we combined stories from a few different patients rather than doing anything that could be traced back to any individual. Anytime we were creating maps, we wanted to be careful not to show anything identifiable. So there are some like kind of less densely populated parts of the county, and if there were only a handful of super users in those areas, we removed them from our maps. And also that was part of why we looked at race, like we looked at ACS measures of race and ethnicity rather than on the individual patient level.
Just a small minor question. I'm curious how you implement it. I remember you mentioning at one point adding like different categories of medical conditions that would trigger the model. Did you incorporate like the varying severity of these different conditions, or were they all lumped together?
They were all lumped. It's basically just what was in the dispatch data set. So it had a few different like text fields that you could kind of glean some information about medical conditions from. And we did some, processing of that data, created some bigrams to analyze, but there's no real indication of severity other than, if they've called EMS for it 50 times, obviously it's pretty severe.
I think we have time for one more question. Here you are.
Thank you. I knew nothing about this topic, and you did a great job. You really did a great job presenting it, and it made it very approachable and interesting, and I appreciate that. I particularly appreciate the way you started and the way you ended. Since I know nothing about this topic, starting with a real person, I don't know if she's actually named Nancy, but starting with Nancy made me instantly understand what you were dealing with, and that really, really worked out well. So that was really good. And also, I sort of have some economist bent. So actually concluding with the cost-benefit analysis, which went way beyond simply the model, but to actually look at the implications of the model, was really quite nice. And so I want to thank you for that. So one of the things about being a modeler, particularly with these large databases, is that you use the structure of modeling to learn a lot about the phenomenon that maybe you didn't know before. So I want to ask you two questions that I gleaned from your data and see if you gleaned the same thing. The first is there's a big difference in the super users between, you called it public insurance. I assume that's Obamacare.
That's Medicare, Medicaid.
I'm sorry?
That's Medicare, Medicaid.
So you don't have Obamacare.
No.
Oh, I see. So we don't know how, so obviously there's been a big cutback in Obamacare. So at this point, we can't make any inferences. It's just Medicaid, Medicare. Okay, that's really interesting. So I wonder if you have any insights into whether your, just from the research you did, whether your proposed interventions of having basically caseworkers for the super users would yield to a better outcome in terms of reduced mortality and morbidity, which is really sort of, in addition to cost, one of the bottom lines. I wonder if you have any insights into that.
I mean, I think that this intervention would work much better for the category of super users that we've kind of been talking about from the beginning, who are like often older adults, isolated, have some kind of mobility needs that are not being met. Fall risks, falls, as I'm sure you know, are like one of the biggest predictors of mortality and also just like incredibly diminished quality of life in older adults. And so any interruption of that, which like this program hopes to and has in the limited population that it's already serving, really interrupted by getting mobility aids installed in homes and helping people move into more accessible places and stuff like that. I think it's been really effective in that way. I think it's tougher thinking about what a social services intervention could do for, like the sickle cell patients, just because there's a real, it's just like a tough medical problem to solve. And I think some social supports could be useful for some of those people, but I'm not sure that they would have the same effects on morbidity and mortality.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful.
Thank
Okay, and last but certainly not least, our team from Philly Stat 360 and OIT. Featuring our wonderful teaching assistant, Jason.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks for coming today. We are vacant property indicators. We're predicting residential vacancy across 437,297 Philadelphia parcels. We're a team of 4, Jason, Xiaoqing, and Li Xuan, and Mei Zhe. And here's a thank to our key clients, Prism, Maggie, Paul, Qing, and Taylor. Thanks for the help and support. And here comes our agenda. We've mainly got 8 parts. The first part is context, and where the Philadelphia built one of the country's first vacancy indicator systems. The VPI launches in November 2016. The framework still works. Here comes the background. Everything begins in 2010. Penn IUR and international study quantified vacancy as a 3.6 billion household wealth in Philadelphia. And the next year, on 2011, doors and windows ordinance requires actual doors and windows on vacant buildings. And in 2013, Philadelphia Land Bank established to consolidate the portion of city-owned vacant parcels. And in 2016, OIT launches VPI with LNI, OPA, Land Bank, and PWD. Multi-source reliability scoring becomes public open data. And for this year, 2026, our model extends the VPI framework with the parcel level probabilities and statistical variation. The data has outgrown the original tooling. VPI today inputs 5 administrative datasets, each a binary flag, and its weight handset in 2016 from domain expertise. It outputs no ground truth performance metric. But our VPI model, we input 34 engineered features, violation, history, license activity, OPA conditions, and so on. Our weights learn from 5,940 OVS confirmed vacancies with leakage audit and spatial CV. And our output test AUC 0.945 holds greater or equal to 0.79 across every zip code, auditable. And our use case, our project is to build a machine learning classifier that estimates vacancy likelihood for every residential buildings in Philadelphia. It includes properties that have never been inspected or flagged. What is not about our project is we're not a final determination of vacancy, not a lien or seizure trigger, and not a substitute for field judgments. It is calibrated starting point that makes existing workflows more systematic and more auditable. Our project is for licenses and inspection field teams and policy planning staff, equality and oversight functions, and researchers, journalists, and community partners. Here comes our app demo.
So let me introduce you guys how to use our website. When we zoom in on the map, we can see each tracks on the map and with a information task to show the risk score. And we have 5 categories of the risk level, also the words. So here is the city summary. We can see the top 10 words below. And if you want to see each word's data, you can just click the button. So the number will change. And for the person who wants to know the top 1%, which means the highest level, highest risk level, you can use this filter. So for the public or the individual users, you can use sensor tracks or the correct address in our search bar, right this. So for the policymaker, you can use words or the correct parcel number in our search bar. Yeah, so it's the same way. You can enter your parcel number in the search bar, and our map will lead you to the corresponding position with the information desk pumping up.
Yeah, apologies for the technical
issue.
delay. I don't know why.
So on the top right corner about this tour, we have some short description about our model, like model performance or the like short description on our model. So that's all of the dashboard.
So the core of our app is the vacancy prediction model. Before we could build that, we need to answer 3 questions. What data do we have? How do we define vacancy? And how do we turn the messy administrative records into the useful model features? So this section is about how we build the foundation for the model. For our analysis, we combine 7 raw data sets from 3 city agencies to build a parcel level of the vacancy signals and the property history. For modeling, the most important step was creating a reliable ground truth label. We called it OVS, the Observe the Vacancy Status. So we built it from 3 administrative city signals. The clean and sell, that means the city had to secure or brought up a property because the property is open, unsafe, and exposed. The open vacant violations are an violations code that directly point to the vacancy-related conditions, and some properties may have a vacant license officially. So if the license is active, we treat it as an evidence that the property is currently in a vacant state. So if a parcel had any of these 3 signals, we treat it as the observed vacant. When we apply this definition, citywide out of about 436,000 residential parcels, only about 1.1% are labeled as observed vacant. The important thing here is that all the resources are overlap, but not completely. That tells us that each source is seeing a different part of the vacancy process. So combining them gives us a stronger label than just focusing on just one data set. Next, we look at the vacancy as a life cycle. Look at the example property here. So this shows how a building's conditions can change over across years. So a vacancy is not a fixed state. It can appear, persist, or disappear over time. So timing is very important for our modeling. So we need to know how not only whether a property had a vacancy-related event, but also when that event happened. Because timing matters, so we build time-based features. For each parcel, we grouped administrative activity into several windows: the last 6 months, the last 2 years, the last 3 years, and last 5 years. And these windows help us separate recent activity from the older history. For example, a property with several violations in the past 6 months is probably showing the current distress, but the property with the same number of the violations are spread across like 10 years, maybe less urgent. So these time-based features help our model to understand how recent or concentrated the vacancy-related events are. After all the data wrangling, we engineered 34 features across 6 data groups. So these features summarize each parcel's the condition, the history, the recent activity, the nearby vacancy context. So this gave us the structured data set that we need for the modeling.
All right, moving on to the modeling section. So with a class imbalance of 1.1% vacancy rate in Philadelphia, we had this issue where we wanted to make sure our models actually work. So we played around with 4 different models, so logistic regression, random forest, and then 2 of the booster models. How we're gonna rank these is we're gonna start with ranking them, whether or not it actually properly sorts vacancy from non-vacancy. Then we wanna make sure it calibrates, making sure it's ground truth, it matches reality on the ground. And finally, we wanna make sure that it's actually generalizable across the entire city and not just remembering one part of the city itself. So starting with the ranking itself, we found that logistic regression and random forest actually led better than the boosted models. And this is mainly because without leakage-prone features, we found that the boosters actually overcommitted to a few features, losing out compared to the random forest and logistic regression. We also calibrated the model. So tree-based models are really good at ranking, but their data, their probability rate actually isn't based on the reality on the ground. So if you see something like a 0.7 from a random forest model, that actually doesn't mean 70% chance of something being vacant on the ground. So by calibrating through isotonic regression, we can make sure that this is more useful for the field officers who are going there in person to actually know the exact percentage of what is the chance of something being vacant. So our final model is isotonic regression and actually an ensemble model between both our best models of the logistic regression and the random forest. One thing to make sure of here, just like the previous group, being a data severe class imbalance, we want to focus on the PRAUC. So 1.1% actually sits at around a 0.01. So we're around 50 times better than a random guess, showing that the model is pretty damn good. Moving on to the validation, generalizability. Can this model actually work across the board? Now we looked for generalization through a random split, zip group 10-fold, and a 5-fold for tracks, and overall, the accuracy is pretty good, meaning that it generalizes across the board, not just remembering one census tract or one region. Looking at different categories, we could see mixed use, multifamily, apartments, and single family actually all align pretty well with the current observed vacancy rate, albeit it slightly predicts more, which is what we want. And finally, the main point of this, why would you use our model compared to the current existing city one? So with the comparison, with the same amount of flags, our model actually catches a better precision and better recall, showing better quality of model. And also, where our disagrees, there's a large amount where both flags, but our model actually captures almost twice the amount, nearly twice the amount of observed vacancies compared to the only VPIs. So one thing you might remember is this house right here. This is actually something our observed vacancy status flagged as not vacant. So it's OVS 0. The city VPI actually doesn't identify it at all as vacant, yet ours puts it at 100%, telling inspectors you have to go there. Now, obviously, this is anecdotal. I found literally the highest percentage one, so it's not all 100%. Most of them are sitting around 70. But as you can see here, this anecdotal evidence shows that our model has potential to be used for clients, for our inspectors to go on the ground. And then Chen Xiaoqing is going to go over the website again to see how the users could actually use it.
So this is the homepage of our website. We show some model performance, the background, the problem, and the step of our model building listing on this page. So we have two ways to go in our dashboard or the methodology. First one is the dashboard, which we have introduced before. We have the button for a short description of our model performance and the data resources. So if we want to know more about our model and how we use these features, we can open the methodology page, and we have a clear content on this page. So the data we used and the features we used, the results of our funding or shows on this page. And we need to be more patient because we have such a long page. It may take us for like 0.5 to an hour to go through these pages and understand our model better. Yeah, so that's all the website we have.
You cancel that out. Oops, why did it jump? Sorry about that. So finally, some key takeaways to quickly wrap up as we're about time. First and foremost, we want to make sure the main key takeaway is that our model actually works. So one of the main things we want to make sure is, since we have an existing model, we want to make sure our model works, and we did all the checks under the sun that I could find, and it works. Second thing is the model is calibrated. This takeaway is mainly saying that this is actually useful for the license and inspector field team on the ground, where they have the actual percentage chance of each thing be vacant, making it more useful for this team. And finally, it is not a full replacement of the existing model. As seen in the comparison, there are things that the current model catches that ours doesn't. So we don't want to treat this as a full replacement. We want to treat this as the next step forward from here, where we could integrate even more things from the existing model to make this even better. So our next steps is, one thing is the label side has existing biases that are built in that are not audited right now. So 311 calls, all these other OVS label things come from, have inherent biases that are not accounted for right now. So that is something that could be addressed potentially. I don't know how, but that's the next step. Residential is only half the picture. The existing VPI model actually has a land vacancy as well. Ours only looks at residential, so that is definitely something that we could look at expanding on next. And finally, inspector feedback loop. So by having some more ground truthing on the ground, we could further improve our model. This could also be done through the water data as well. And finally, as a final thank you, we would like to thank Philly OIT and Philly Stat 360 once again for trusting us with something that they've built before, and hopefully our work is helpful for their work in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll give the first word to our colleagues at the city. I see Taylor is in the meeting, and perhaps there are people sitting behind me who are from the city again, who I don't know. But Taylor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to say this is really great work. Thank you so much. The team gave something pretty close to this presentation last week because several members from the city side would not be able to make it today, and they did phenomenal work both then and today. I don't really have a ton of questions because we already talked so much last time, and I met with my team about that as well. But I guess just out of curiosity, this is a really small question, but when you came up with the categories, talking about like low risk versus high risk, those 5 categories, how did you determine that? Is that like an equal interval, a quantile?
So that was actually equal interval with the risk categories, which is why we also added the top 1% to make it more. We added an additional category of the top 1% of every single vacancy like flagged parcel to make it more usable for a potential L&I field team to actually identify which ones are properly there. But we wanted these separations so it's useful for both the field team and the public, because I feel like for a public member who doesn't really dive into this as much, having simply a quantile, like just I think it was a 0.2 distribution of from least very likely to middle, and then all that distribution is more usable for the for the people who aren't fully into this field, whereas the field team has that top 1% thing where they could then dive into it deeper.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you so much. We had lots of meetings throughout the semester, and the team was always really receptive to our thoughts, but also just really did a great job throughout the whole thing. So great job, you guys. I can't wait to get into this and see how we can incorporate it with the existing model as well.
Thank you.
Yes, Jian has a question.
Thank you so much. Identifying vacant properties is such an important thing, but that's so under-resourced to find. So I'm really glad that this work will exist. I was just wondering, so the properties that Clean and Seal and the licenses don't flag as vacant, but your model does flag as vacant. What kinds of things are important for the model? I just would love to hear you say more about that.
Like what kind of things are
important for the models where it flags a high likelihood vacancy, but it's not in Clean and Seal or in the licenses?
So many things from the Clean and Seal and licensing team don't. The whole reason we're doing this model and this model exists is because existing data is lacking. So ground truth data costs money and they don't really know where to send it. So rather than there's first and foremost, there's limited amount of data. This isn't everything that Clean and Seal has access to. That's why Clean and Seal isn't the end all be all. Our model, since it's an ensemble model, Random Forest likes our time series features. So looking at the different time series of number of violations throughout the time, most recent, all those time series ones, the Random Forest really likes and has very high importance. And then for our logistic, the OPA exterior conditions was actually one of the higher models, but higher influences. So that's why we did the ensemble, because we wanted both of those combined together, which made the model better.
Thanks. Oh, awesome job, guys. That was really great. I am just a little curious from the policy and who is this for side. If you could kind of touch a little bit more on, you obviously mentioned L&I and inspectors, but what are some of the other policy use cases of this, kind of specific to equity as well? I think you had mentioned that, and I am very curious about where you think that lands in terms of equitable policy related to vacancy.
So with our vacancy indicator, this could be used as the baseline to actually understand what's going on. So if you're doing specific equity research, you could basically highlight, put that as another layer to see if there's any impacts. And we actually did that with not poverty rate, but income, median income. And we found that actually the vacancy is pretty in line across income levels. So our data isn't overly biased towards one income group over the other. But for specific equity researchers, I'm not the expert on that, but this model is essentially something that provides the data set that doesn't currently exist, which could be used to inform decisions in their expertise, whatever that is.
Yeah, great presentation. Sorry, that was loud. Great presentation. I really like from a communications aspect, I really liked how you showed that property, its progression over time, and then showed how your model is a meaningful improvement over the status quo with respect to that property. I thought that was powerful. I had a question just out of curiosity on the modeling side. I understood why you went with the composite model, but was there a reason for that 50-50 split between the two models within the composite and how you came to that decision?
Yeah, so the 50-50 split was just to ensure, because both of those, as I said for the previous question, where Random Forest had a significantly different set of feature importances compared to the logistic regression. We didn't want to put an arbitrary difference between how much weight we're giving either model. So we decided 50-50 split makes the most sense since the feature importance for both were so different.
Yeah, really interesting presentation. I like that you started off with a history and showed why it was important to get better estimates. A comment and a question. First of all, I like your use of an ensemble approach. I think that makes a lot of sense. Whenever something is this controversial, it's useful to be as inclusive as you can. And I think the ensemble Not to beat a dead horse about my dislike of AUC measures, but if you're doing projects like this that are very controversial and are likely to result in litigation, in addition to the overall predictive accuracy, a good thing to do is look at misclassifications and to look at patterns of misclassifications. So, for example, understanding where your model predicted 100% vacancy, but another model or the actual experience predicted like 20%, and to understand, was there a spatial pattern, was there an attribute pattern, is extremely important in this types of things, because you're going to conclude that, boy, there's 100% likelihood that this property is going to become vacant, and the owner is probably going to the current owner, assuming there is one, is going to disagree with you. So understanding the pattern of disagreements on classification is extremely important. It's much more important than simple predictive accuracy. That's just a long time experience. My other question, very quickly, is so let's suppose that you get a prediction of 100% vacancy within the next cycle. What would you suggest the city does? What's your policy suggestion?
Like 100% vacancy in what?
Well, that you're predicting that this property that you pointed to on whatever its status is now, you're giving it a score of 100%. What does, now that you have that information, what should the city do?
So I could give it from a more personal perspective, because our entire project is more meant to be a tool that other policymakers could then use to inform those decisions, obviously with more context and more.
Okay, so now that you've passed the buck, what's your opinion?
Right. My opinion would be, well, there, first and foremost would be sending a real inspector there. I would say actually getting that ground truth data, getting that, making sure that the model actually is perfectly in line, and retraining the model from the ground truthing. Further policy integration from there, I don't think I am informed to say.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Vacant housing is such a big, as you said, a very controversial topic, and I don't think I have enough policy knowledge to give you a proper answer.
Well, I appreciate the care that you gave to, John mentions this is controversial. Taylor says, a lot of departments have interest in vacant properties for their own internal processes. Planning, water, L&I, OPA, et cetera, were all part of the original interdepartmental group that created the first version of this model. This is because they all had their own metrics for where they thought vacant properties likely were, and the model was meant to combine some different pieces into one. It also helps prioritize clean and seals. So it's interesting because this is a segue to larger housing and land development policies and trends and in the city as a whole. Thank you for taking on this project. It is kind of, you note that it goes back to 2016 and that it's one of sort of the projects that's been on a list for a long time in our discussions with OIT to revisit. So thank you for taking this on. And congratulations to you.
Thank you.
I just have a few brief remarks because I realize I'm standing in between you and your lunch. But I think it would be, we should definitely take an opportunity to reflect on what's been done this semester. And for some of you in your entire careers at Penn, this may be, one of the last times we get together in a classroom setting, the graduation's coming up and so on. First, I want to congratulate you on excellent work, and having been there along the journey, I'm particularly excited about the times where there were things that we went through some uncertainty and we had disagreements, and maybe we had, you said, I want to do it this way, and Matt and I said, I don't know, do it that way. And the projects became uniquely your own. especially as we get later in the semester and you know so much about these data sets and the policies and these sorts of things. And one of the things that I think I hope you got a chance to understand when you were working with your clients and working on these projects is that one of the things that defines the professional world that you're gonna enter is that there are people who, you know, it's not necessarily how much they, excuse me, it's not necessarily how much they know. That's one of the reasons they're in their position, but it's how much they care, right? These are not people being compensated like tech executives, or but they're responsible for understanding some of the same phenomena that you need to implement in the private sector that you might be well remunerated for. But they're there because it matters. And I think when you see a project like the Guilford project and you look at the data, those are real people having real problems in their real lives. And it's very meaningful that you were able to do something that will help real people. And I think all of your projects bring that to the table, and I hope you take that approach in the workforce. The other thing that occurred to me in all of these projects is that we sort of stand on the shoulders of people who are collecting good quality data, right? And oftentimes we lament that there are data we wish we had or the data we wish they were better. And the whole architecture of like our modern economy and the technological horizon that we're trying to reach with you in your careers using tools like the Snowflake suite and whatever are built on top of that. And so hopefully while you're here, even for a brief amount of time more at a university, you appreciate and advocate for the people who make it their job to do basic data collection and research, who build data sets, who advocate for instruments that collect things, funding programs, funding research, funding fundamental data collection at public agencies and making sure it's well-governed and high quality, because we depend on all of them to do work like this. So I hope you take that with you as well. On behalf of Matt and myself, Elizabeth, John, members of the faculty, it's really a pleasure to go through this process with you, Xiaozhang as well. Sorry. And I certainly appreciate what you've been able to accomplish here. And as you see, there are people who are our clients who come back to the fold when they're in the middle of their career and generously offer to give you their time and their data. So hopefully someday you'll be able to repay us the favor. And as you go forth, now you are colleagues. You are no longer students. Well, actually, after you give me the rest of your deliverables for the website, then we'll make that distinction. But, you know, so I want to congratulate you and offer our professional collegiality. Anything that you need when you leave this institution, we're happy to try to help with. So thank you very much and congratulations. That's the conclusion of our morning program. We have our independent study practicum section in the afternoon, and our departmental staff has been very helpful in putting together. We have food and drink, and we can schmooze for an hour, and then Xiaozheng section will convene at 1 o'clock, right? Okay, so we'll take a break until 1 o'clock.